Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan at the European People's Party, and on behalf of the EPP, welcome to another edition of EPP Family Talks. Over the past couple of weeks, we have been talking with leaders from around our political family to hear their ideas and the projects they're working on during this time of coronavirus crisis. Today, it is our privilege to speak with the president of our youth association, YEPP, Lídia Pereira, who also is a member of the European Parliament since summer of 2019. So let's see if we can connect with President Lídia Pereira. I think we should be live. Did it work? I think we're just waiting for the connection. Hello, President Lídia Pereira. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Hello, Nathan. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting, and thanks for the initiative.
Well, as I was just saying, when we were waiting for you to connect, we've been, over the last couple of weeks, talking with several of our EPP leaders to just hear from them what they're doing, what they're working on, what ideas they have, especially during this time of coronavirus crisis. We've spoken, in the last couple of weeks, we've spoken to our Secretary General, Tono Lopez Istúriz, to EPP Vice President and EPP Group Vice President Siegfried Muresan, EPP Vice President and Minister Helen McEntee from the Republic of Ireland, to Commission Vice President Suiza, to EDS Chairman Carlo Angrisano, and to yesterday to Margarita Skinas, Vice President of the European Commission. So it's our honor and privilege to welcome you today and to hear what you're doing. What we've basically been trying to get a very informal, personal sort of feel from our different leaders. So as I've been doing with other leaders, I would just start off by asking you, how are you coping during this lockdown? What's a typical day for you been like?
Okay, well, it's indeed strange times that we are living in, and but I must say that despite the circumstances, I think I am coping okay. It is a time that we can devote to do some things that we usually don't do. For example, catching up on the reading. I also try to keep doing sports every day, half an hour, or going for a walk or jogging. So far it is it's bearable, but of course I miss the business as usual. So that's a little bit more difficult to handle, but it's for a good reasons. It's for the safety of us all. So we all have to play our role in this fighting against the pandemic. But I would say that it's been also a time to, do some reflection upon the course of politics, Europe, and of course the world. So I think it's a time for preparation for the next months, because I believe that we will be tested in several levels. And also the European project will be at the heart of the response or in the economic recovery post COVID-19.
Just want to take a moment to welcome all of our viewers. I see Monica, Kevin, Paula, Davide, Pavel, and lots of other people joining us from all over Europe. So welcome to all of you. So Lídia, you have sort of a couple of different roles, which I'd like to ask you about. One of them is you're president of YEPP, our youth association. You're also, since last summer, a member of the European Parliament, representing our EPP member party, PSD, the Social Democratic Party of Portugal. Mm-hmm. I think you're maybe in Brussels now, but before I ask you about some of the more specific things you're working on in those two capacities, could you give us an update just on what's happening in your home country of Portugal?
Yeah, sure. So the situation in Portugal, when compared to countries like Spain or Italy, and both southern countries in Europe, is not so, let's say, serious. In fact, even compared to Belgium, which has a similar population, the situation is considerably better. My country adopted confinement measures earlier, and I think it was a very important step to prevent further contagion. And now we see that it made significant difference. And even if we had adopted, for example, the use of masks as the Czech Republic did, perhaps we wouldn't have even a smaller number of cases. So the situation is under control. We managed to flatten the curve, but it will all depend on the coming months, and also on the attitudes that after the confinement measures are lifted, the people adopt. Anyway, so this is good in terms of public health, but it's very bad news for Portugal when it comes to the economy. Portugal is alongside with, for example, Greece, Italy, Spain, countries that very much depend on the sectors like tourism. Portugal has a very high public debt and a reduced budgetary margin to offset the measures, or to support the measures to fight the pandemic, for example, layoff measures. So I think the core answer to this is going to be defined here in Brussels by the European institutions, to measures to overcome the crisis, giving a better support to the people that are afraid, first and foremost, of losing their jobs, and also businesses fighting to survive. So I think as a summary, on the public health, things are being handled quite well. On the economic side, it is a very it's probably the beginning of a big turmoil. So I'm a bit concerned. I'm not a bit, very much concerned with the economic response and with the measures that the EU will put forward to respond to the economic crisis.
Well, this is something that I know you're working on a lot in the European Parliament. You're a member of the Econ Committee, which is the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. And just yesterday I saw, prior to the European Council meeting, you posted an op-ed, which in Portuguese, if I can get the title right, was GSG, Decidir e Defender a Economia, which in English is D-Days, Deciding and Defending the Economy. What was your main argument in that op-ed?
I see you did a good job researching mine. So yeah, yesterday I published an article in the Portuguese newspaper dedicated to economic affairs. D-Day is a clear reference to a decisive moment, a turning point. A few days earlier, on Monday, I participated in the economic dialogue held between the president of the Eurogroup and the Econ Committee. As I said to the president of the Eurogroup on Monday, I don't understand why it takes so long between all the meetings that have been scheduled, the council meetings. And we can look at yesterday's council meeting. Another European Council took place, but are there any steps forward? I see some, but I think there are still very few. They're very small steps. And we have to acknowledge that for once and for all, that companies, businesses cannot wait. I am a member of the European Parliament. I know that there are negotiations going on between member states. I understand that there are bureaucratic procedures that we cannot ignore, but people who are at home and who already might feel disengaged with the European project, they are impatient. Right now, everyone is talking about the European Union, which on the one hand, it is positive because people reckon that there's the European Union. But we should be strengthening our image in the eyes of the citizens, of the people. It is a huge opportunity, and I am not sure that we are going or we are being so bold in taking such direction.
So you mentioned just the slowness that sometimes is the case with maybe decisions or initiatives taken at European level. One of our viewers just commented with the question, are there any serious plans? And so maybe my next question would be, what do you think the next step should be?
I think I think it is important to distinguish between the different roles from the different European institutions. I strongly believe that the European Parliament and the European Commission are doing their job. I think the European Council, the Council has to decide or has to approve, given that in the past weeks the Council mandated the Eurogroup to come up with a plan, mandated the Commission, and they have been delivering. There are some important initiatives, one that was put forward by the Commission, the SURE Fund, to support layoff measures to protect the employment across Europe. Also, the Eurogroup suggested the use of the European Investment Bank credit lines to support small and medium-sized enterprises. So there's a number of actions, there's a number of solutions that are already on the table, but it seems that it's rather complicated to reach an agreement in the Council. And I actually, in the last plenary session in the Parliament, I warned the Parliament that we cannot wait. So I think, again, we will have to wait for the Commission to put in place another set of measures that were approved yesterday, but they are still little for the dimension of the situation we are living in. And well, we will have to wait for another Council meeting, and this will be the 6th since the pandemic started. I am just a bit reluctant on the pace with which we are moving forward, because this is a very different situation, a crisis compared to the financial crisis. It's far from being the same, but this is an opportunity to also to strengthen the European project. And I think we cannot forget that, given that we have rising populism in the past 8-10 years, that people expect action from the European Union.
Well, so this definitely is not an issue which will be going away anytime soon. And thanks for your ideas and perspective on that, and I know for the attention which you're continuing to give to it. I wanted to maybe transition now to focus on your kind of the other hat that you're wearing, which is president of YEPP, the youth of the EPP. Well, the question I suppose is, how has YEPP been active during these last several weeks, and what is YEPP working on? I know I saw, for example, our EPP Secretary General joined your council meeting via video conference recently, and our EPP President Donald Tusk joined your board meeting, if I saw correctly. So what is YEPP doing these days?
Yeah, well, YEPP, given that we cannot meet in person and physically for the moment, we are very committed and very concerned with this situation, and we have come up with some proposals, and we presented them to the public, not only to the Secretary General but also to President Tusk. Even yesterday, YEPP published a statement calling for an increased EU budget to combat the COVID-19 and to lessen the economic impact of the pandemic. We explained to President Tusk that prioritizing the increase in the overall budget will aid and support in acquiring adequate resources to respond during the post-pandemic times. And this pandemic has highlighted the inadequacy of the current EU framework to combat the current and future pandemics. There is a discrepancy among various EU member states in terms of economic stability and the means to respond to the crisis efficiently. So the budgetary increase would, for the 7 years to come, provide for additional resources to support member states who have been most affected by COVID-19, but also prepare and again strengthen the whole Union to be able to give a timely and effective response. So what we are doing in YEPP, we will continue to work on proposals, solutions, because of the difficult times. We are the generation hero as well. We live, my generation lives or does not know borders for work, for study, for travel. So what people can expect from YEPP is that we will continue to be an active voice in the Parliament and outside the Parliament. And I hope that the European Commission can show us a strong political leadership by presenting a good plan to the 6th meeting of the next Council, a meeting and coordinating efforts to ensure that solidarity is at the core of the European response. So from YEPP, people can expect preparedness and involvement to present solutions and proposals for the future, for a brighter future in Europe in a post-COVID situation.
You mentioned the importance of increasing the budget, basically the 7-year budget, the MFF multi-annual financial framework.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the particular challenges that young people are facing? And maybe it would be great if you had any particular stories you might highlight,
Yep.
The kinds of things that people in your own YEPP network are experiencing.
I think we as youngsters, like in the previous financial crisis, there was a huge increase of the youth unemployment, and it is usually one of the most affected factors in when there's an economic downturn. So we are very much concerned with the impact that COVID-19 might have for youth unemployment, for example. Also, we often refer to the support of SMEs, but there's also a lot of young people that invest and that they're developing. They're part of developing startups, for example. So I think this is an additional struggle to have support from member states, also to make sure that startups are covered during this economic response. So I think, as I said previously, this crisis is very much different from the financial crisis, but the youth will be impacted, and we have to make sure that we develop the sufficient instruments to mitigate those impacts, and to make sure that young people can still believe and trust in the European project. Because if once we managed to create Erasmus, and it was a great initiative because it connects young people around Europe, even though the numbers of the students that actually use Erasmus are still little for the objectives that the European Commission had in the past, we will have a world and a Europe post-COVID-19. So we have to give the young people the hope to be as much as connected as we had in Erasmus, but connected with conditions to work, to start up their own companies, and in the end that the EU did not fail on them as and it's important because with higher youth unemployment, and there are several studies that refer to that, there's also growing numbers on the sentiment against the European project. So this is connected, and if we want to deliver for young people, we have to bear this in mind, and to be resolute when it comes to policy options to be considered.
All very serious and thoughtful ideas, and thank you so much for that perspective. Like we've done with our other leaders, we've sort of tried to break these interviews up into a more serious and a more fun part. So we started with a personal question to you, and then we asked you about your work in the European Parliament, your work as president of YEPP, and now we'd like to circle back and ask you some more, if we could, personal, informal kinds of questions, so people can get to know you maybe a bit better.
Sure.
So first of all, I would ask just a very simple question. Is there anything during this period of sort of strange lockdown in these last several weeks, anything particularly interesting which you have been reading, which you would recommend?
Well, I'm actually reading a very interesting book. It's Capitalism in America. It's written by Alan Greenspan. He used to be president of the Federal Reserve, and it's basically the economic history of the U.S. And it's interesting to make a parallel between the foundation of the United States and the EU, and mostly to make some reflections on both sides of the Atlantic and how different our economies developed. And one of the main interesting things that I've been thinking about is that the US managed to build a country from scratch, whereas in Europe we were not. We also started from scratch, but with each one of the member states with a strong and rich legacy, historic legacy, which in the end enriches the whole concept of the European project that we have, with all the struggles that it sometimes entails. For example, when it comes to economies to the single market. Breaking the single market more on the services that we still, it's still something that we have to catch up when compared to the products that we have. The freedom of the freedom to in the single market that we still don't have the same in services, and in the US it's quite the opposite. So I think it's an interesting book to draw some conclusions on the differences between both sides of the Atlantic, and maybe something to learn from the Americans, I think. And another book that I'm reading is The Light That Failed from Ivan Krastev, mostly about the Eastern democratic history in the recent times. Which is also important to because we are living in a situation with some divide on the economic side between the North and the South, on values such as the rule of law, freedom of speech, most the divide between the East and Western and West. So I think it's important that we take this time to draw some conclusions and learn the lessons to have a prompt action in a post-crisis period.
So one of our viewers is just thanking you for those recommendations. I saw another comment greeting us from an EPP supporter in London, so greetings back to you.
Okay.
Great. I know that you've been on I mean, this is a fascinating topic. I know you've been on at least one delegation to the U.S. in the last several months, and that's something maybe we could talk about another time. We just have about 30 seconds or so left, so I have two very quick questions for you. One, is there something in particular you're looking forward to most once this period of lockdown is finished? Maybe a restaurant you'd like to go to or a place you'd like to visit?
Yeah, well, my friends know that I'm really looking forward whenever the sanitary conditions allow to go to Greece. It's one of my favorite countries, not only for the culture but also for the beautiful beaches they have in their islands, and also the food. I love Greek food, and I'm really craving to go for a great Greek restaurant, and if possible in Greek territory.
And then the final question, and this is really not serious at all, but you have an interesting profile pic, I think, on your Twitter feed, which intrigued me, which is you sitting in the driver's seat of an old Volkswagen van again, painted orange. And I just wondered if you could, in a few seconds, tell us what the story is there.
Yeah, sure. Well, that van was the official campaign, my campaign van in last year's European elections. So I was driving around the country with the Volkswagen van. It was called Celeste, and it was it was where we had our, town hall meetings, and we were stopping in different places across the country. And that was the moment when I was driving the van. But it's a very symbolic, and for me, it was quite an important symbol of my campaign, because we used the van, but we committed to offset the carbon emissions produced by the van, because if we want to take care and care about the environment, we also have to have concrete actions upon that. So we used the van. It's a generational symbol. Everyone relates to that van, even if we are talking about our grandparents, or if you are talking about my generation, our generation. So that was the idea. It was an intergenerational symbol, and also a way to commit to have concrete actions when it comes to environment.
Well, and so I guess now that you're elected as an MEP, the journey goes on. Lídia Pereira, member of the European Parliament, President of YEPP, thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the EPP, thank you for the work you're doing, and talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
To all of our viewers, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of EPP Family Talk. Please join us again on Monday afternoon at 3:30 on Facebook, when we will be speaking with Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President of the European Parliament. Have a great weekend.